Maya's fingers trembled as she reached for the old man's outstretched hand. His skin felt paper-thin and cold, but his grip was surprisingly firm when their palms connected. "Ezra," he breathed, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Ezra Whitmore." "I'm Maya," she whispered back, though she wasn't sure why it mattered. Nothing had mattered for a long time. His roomy blue eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to pull away. "Maya Chen," he said, and her blood turned to ice. She hadn't told him her last name. "How do you—" "Li Mei," he interrupted, the words tumbling out with desperate urgency. "Your grandmother, Li Mei Chen. She had eyes like yours, fierce, beautiful, stubborn as hell." Maya's world tilted. Her grandmother had died when Maya was 12, taking with her all the bedtime stories about magical farms and secret gardens that had once made Maya believe in fairy tales. Stories her mother had dismissed as old woman nonsense whenever Maya asked about them later. "You knew my grandmother?" The question scraped against her throat. Ezra's breathing grew more labored, but his eyes never left her face. "Loved her. Should have fought harder." Each word seemed to cost him everything. "In my desk drawer, top left, the key." "What key? I don't understand." "The farm." His grip tightened with surprising strength. "It's yours now, all of it. 200 acres of—" A spasm of pain cut off his words, his body arching against the hay. Maya had seen enough death during her social work years to recognize the signs. "I need to call 911. You need help." "Too late," he gasped. "Been waiting too long already. 47 years too long." His free hand fumbled inside his jacket pocket, producing a crumpled envelope. "For you. Always been for you." The envelope felt substantial in her hands, her name written across it in shaking handwriting. Not Maya Chen, but Li Mei's granddaughter. The ink looked fresh. "I don't understand any of this," she said. But Ezra's eyes had already begun to glaze over, that terrible distance settling in that she'd witnessed too many times in hospital corridors and foster homes. The distance that meant goodbye. "The stories she told you," he whispered. "About the farm with the apple orchard, the red barn, the creek that sang lullabies." His voice grew fainter with each word. "This is that place. This is home." Maya's heart slammed against her ribs. Those stories. Her grandmother had made them up. Hadn't she? Beautiful tales of a place where flowers grew year-round and every sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, where someone waited who would love you exactly as you were. "That's not real," she said desperately. "Those were just stories." But Ezra was smiling now, even as his breathing grew more shallow. "Some stories are just memories we haven't lived yet." Thunder crashed overhead, and in the flash of lightning that followed, Maya saw the barn clearly for the first time. Red paint peeling from ancient walls, the sweet smell of hay and something else, apples. Through a gap in the boards, she could make out the silhouette of an orchard, branches heavy with fruit despite the late season. "This can't be happening," she murmured. Ezra's hand was growing slack in hers. "Tell her," he breathed. "Tell Li Mei I kept my promise. Tell her I waited." "She's dead," Maya said gently. "She died years ago. I know." His smile widened, peaceful now. "I'll see her soon." And then he was gone. Just like that. Maya sat in the sudden quiet, still holding the hand of a stranger who somehow knew her grandmother's name, who spoke of promises and waiting, who claimed to be leaving her a farm that existed only in childhood bedtime stories. The envelope in her other hand felt impossibly heavy. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, the drumming rain softening to a gentle patter. Through the barn's open door, she could see her battered Honda Civic sitting in the mud, everything she owned crammed into its backseat and trunk. 3 years of living in that car, 3 years of running from a past that had shattered her so completely she'd convinced herself she didn't need anyone or anything. Yet here she sat, holding the hand of a dead man who'd called her home. Maya looked down at Ezra's peaceful face, then at the envelope bearing her grandmother's handwriting. The smart thing would be to call the police, report the death, and drive away. She was good at driving away. But as lightning flickered once more across the Vermont sky, illuminating the apple orchard her grandmother had described in perfect detail decades ago, Maya realized that sometimes running away just brings you full circle to exactly where you're meant to be. She squeezed Ezra's still hand one last time. "I'll tell her," she whispered. Then she opened the envelope. The ordinary world. Inside the envelope, a single sheet of paper bore her grandmother's distinctive handwriting, the careful, measured strokes that had once labeled mason jars of pickled vegetables and written birthday cards that always arrived exactly on time. Maya's hands shook as she held the paper closer to catch the fading light. "My dearest Maya, if you are reading this, then my beloved Ezra has found you at last. I pray that when this moment comes, you will have the courage I never possessed. The farm is yours, as it was always meant to be. The lawyer's name is Thomas Hartwell in Millbrook Village. Tell him the morning glory blooms at dawn. There is so much you don't know, so much I should have told you before I lost the right. Look for the blue tin under the floorboards of the kitchen. Everything I couldn't say is waiting there. Love transcends death, little bird. Remember that? Your grandmother, Lee May." Maya read the words twice before they began to make sense. Her grandmother had known this would happen, had planned for it. The realization settled over her like a weight she couldn't lift. She pulled out her phone, 1 bar of service, barely enough, and dialed 911. The conversation felt surreal, reporting the death of Ezra Whitmore at 847 Maple Creek Road, a place she shouldn't have known existed until 3 hours ago. The dispatcher promised an ambulance within 20 minutes, though they both knew there was no rush now. While she waited, Maya walked through the barn in a daze. Ezra's body lay peaceful in the hay, and she found herself studying his weathered face, searching for some clue to the mystery he'd left her. He looked like any other elderly farmer, work-worn hands, sun-weathered skin, clothes that had seen better decades. Nothing to suggest he'd been carrying her grandmother's secrets all these years. The red lights of the ambulance carved through the darkness, followed by a police cruiser. Maya met them at the barn door, explaining how she'd taken shelter from the storm and found Ezra dying. She kept the letter folded in her pocket. Something told her it wasn't time to share that part yet. Officer Janet Mills was a compact woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the methodical manner of someone who'd handled small-town tragedies before. "You knew Mr. Whitmore?" "No," Maya said, which was technically true. "I'd never seen him before tonight." Mills made notes while the EMTs worked. "Traveling through?" Maya hesitated. 3 years ago, she would have said she was a social worker from Boston, with an apartment and a life and a reason for being wherever she was. Now she was just someone who happened to be passing through when an old man died. "Yes." But even as she said it, the word felt wrong. You didn't just pass through a place that had lived in your childhood dreams. You didn't randomly seek shelter in a barn that matched your grandmother's stories down to the red paint and apple-sweet air. After the officials left with Ezra's body, Maya sat in her Honda Civic and stared at the farmhouse. It was a modest 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and shutters that had once been green. Even in the darkness, she could see it needed work. Loose boards, missing shingles, gutters pulling away from the roof. It looked exactly like abandonment felt. She'd been living this way for 3 years now, sleeping in her car or cheap motels, picking up temporary jobs that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. A week washing dishes at a diner in Maine, 2 weeks cleaning offices in New Hampshire, whatever kept her moving and kept her from thinking too hard about what she'd lost. The custody case had ended more than her career. It had ended her belief that fighting for people mattered, that the system could protect the vulnerable, that love was enough to overcome bureaucratic indifference. 8-year-old Marcus Delane had looked at her with such trust when she'd promised his mother would get clean, promised he wouldn't have to go back to his father. She'd fought for 6 months to keep that promise, working 18-hour days, calling in every favor, believing that if she just tried hard enough, cared deeply enough, she could save them both. Marcus died 3 days after the judge returned him to his father's custody. The bruises told the story she'd tried so desperately to prevent. Maya had walked out of the courthouse that day and kept walking. Resigned from the Department of Children and Families via email. Let her apartment lease expire. Sold everything that couldn't fit in her car and started driving. She'd thought she was done with caring about anything or anyone. Caring hurt too much, cost too much, failed too often. It was easier to drift from place to place, existing on the surface of life where nothing could reach deep enough to wound her again. But now, she sat holding her grandmother's letter. And for the first time in 3 years, Maya felt something stirring beneath the protective numbness she'd cultivated. It felt dangerous and terrifying and exactly like hope. She looked up at the farmhouse windows, dark and waiting, and wondered what secrets lay hidden beneath those kitchen floorboards. Maya sat in her car for another hour, engine off, watching the farmhouse shadows shift in the moonlight that had emerged after the storm. The letter felt like it was burning a hole in her jacket pocket. Tell him the morning glory blooms at dawn. What kind of password was that? The smart thing would be to drive to the nearest motel, sleep this off, and figure out in the morning whether she was having some kind of breakdown. 3 years of living in her car, eating gas station sandwiches, and avoiding human connection. Maybe she'd finally snapped. Maybe she'd imagined the whole thing. But the envelope was real. Her grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable, those careful loops and precise crosses that had once made grocery lists feel like love letters. And Ezra Whitmore was definitely dead. She had the business card officer Mills had given her to prove it. Maya pulled out her phone and searched for Thomas Hartwell, lawyer, Millbrook, Vermont. His practice had a simple website with office hours starting at 9 a.m. It was currently 2:30 in the morning. She could wait 6.5 hours. She'd waited 3 years to feel anything resembling purpose. What was 6 more hours? But even as she tried to settle back in the driver's seat, her eyes kept drifting to the farmhouse. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, telling stories of secret hiding places and buried treasures. Look for the blue tin under the floorboards of the kitchen. Maya had always assumed those stories were purely imagination, the kind of fairy tales grandmothers told to make bedtime more magical. But then again, she'd also assumed the apple orchard was make-believe, and she could smell its sweet fragrance even through her closed car windows. A light flickered on in a house across the valley, someone else awake in the small hours, and Maya realized she was making a choice. She could drive away right now, return to her carefully constructed numbness, and pretend this night never happened. Or she could walk up to that front door and see how deep this particular rabbit hole went. The decision felt enormous, weighted with 3 years of accumulated emptiness and a lifetime of disappointment. Since Marcus died, Maya had become an expert at expecting nothing from anyone. It was safer that way, cleaner. When you didn't hope, you couldn't be devastated. But Ezra had known her grandmother's name, had described stories only Maya should have known, had looked at her with recognition, as if he'd been waiting specifically for her to walk into that barn. Some stories are just memories we haven't lived yet. Maya climbed out of her Honda Civic before she could change her mind. The farmhouse front door was unlocked, which probably said something about small-town Vermont that her cynical social worker brain wanted to analyze. But she was beyond analysis now, moving on pure instinct as she stepped into the dark entryway. The beam of her phone's flashlight revealed hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of use, walls lined with family photographs she didn't recognize, and the kind of accumulated stillness that spoke of recent abandonment. The house smelled like old books and lavender, as if someone had been trying to make it feel like home right up until the end. The kitchen was at the back of the house, a large room with farmhouse sink and open shelving displaying mismatched dishes. Maya knelt on the floor and ran her hands along the boards, looking for loose sections. Near the window overlooking what must be the apple orchard, her fingers found a board that shifted slightly when pressed. She worked at it with her car keys until it came up, revealing a shallow space beneath. Her phone light illuminated a blue tin the size of a cigar box, exactly as her grandmother had promised. Maya sat back on her heels, tin in her hands, heart hammering. This was it, The moment when everything changed, when the careful distance she'd maintained from the world collapsed entirely. She could put the tin back, replace the floorboard and walk away. Return to her safe, empty existence where nothing mattered enough to hurt her. Instead, she opened the lid. Inside, dozens of letters tied with faded ribbon. Photographs of a young Asian woman she recognized as her grandmother, but decades younger than Maya had ever seen her, standing beside a tall, dark-haired man who could only be a young Ezra Whitmore, and at the bottom, a legal document with her own name on it, Last Will and Testament of Ezra Thomas Whitmore. Maya's hands shook as she unfolded the will. The language was formal, but the meaning was crystal clear. Ezra Whitmore was leaving her everything. The farm, the house, 200 acres of Vermont countryside worth what looked like several $1,000,000, to a granddaughter of Lee Mei Chen, in fulfillment of a promise made long ago. She sat on the kitchen floor of a house that was apparently now hers, surrounded by evidence of a love story she'd never known existed, holding legal proof that a complete stranger had just changed her life forever. The morning glory blooms at dawn. Maya checked her phone, 3:47 a.m. In just over 4 hours, she would walk into Thomas Hartwell's office and discover what other secrets her grandmother had been keeping. The choice was made. There was no going back now. Maya stared at the will until the words blurred together, her mind spinning through possibilities and consequences like a broken compass searching for true north. Several $1,000,000. 200 acres, a house she was sitting in as if she belonged there, when belonging anywhere was the one thing she'd taught herself to stop wanting. She set the document aside with trembling hands and reached for the letters. The ribbon was silk, faded from deep purple to lavender with age. As she untied it, the scent of dried roses drifted up. Her grandmother had always tucked rose petals between important papers, claiming they preserved memories along with the words. The top letter was addressed to my dearest Lee Mei in handwriting she now recognized as Ezra's, dated July 15, 1976. Maya calculated quickly. Her mother would have been born in 1975. Her grandmother would have been barely 19. I know your family will never accept us, the letter began. But what we have transcends their fears, their prejudices. This farm could be our sanctuary, a place where love matters more than the color of our skin or the disapproval of small minds. Maya's stomach clenched. She'd heard whispers throughout her childhood about why her grandmother had come to America, why she'd married Maya's grandfather so quickly, why the family had moved from Vermont to Boston when her mother was still a baby. The official story was economic opportunity, but the bitter way her grandfather spoke of that place whenever Vermont was mentioned suggested something more complicated. She pulled out her phone, needing to ground herself in the familiar ritual of research that had once been second nature in her social work days. A quick search revealed what she should have expected: anti-Asian sentiment in 1970s rural Vermont, the legacy of immigration exclusion acts, communities where difference was met with suspicion and worse. Maya set the phone aside and picked up one of the photographs. Her grandmother couldn't have been much older than Maya was now, but Lee Mei's face held a radiant hope that Maya barely remembered feeling. She was laughing at something Ezra had said, her hand reaching toward the camera as if to include whoever was watching in their joy. They looked like people who believed love could conquer anything. Maya had believed that once too. Before Marcus. Before the family court judge who dismissed her concerns about domestic violence because the father had a better lawyer and a more convincing smile. Before she'd learned that love wasn't enough to save anyone from systems designed to protect the wrong people. But inheriting this place wouldn't just mean accepting Ezra's gift. It would mean staying somewhere, putting down roots, becoming the kind of person who could be found. For 3 years, Maya's survival had depended on remaining invisible, untraceable, disconnected from anything that mattered enough to be taken away. The farm would change that. Property ownership meant public records, tax obligations, a legal identity tied to a specific place. It meant being Maya Chen again instead of just another drifter paying cash for gas and food. It meant risking the possibility that caring about something again would destroy her when she inevitably lost it. Maya stood abruptly, pacing to the kitchen window. Dawn was still hours away, but the storm had passed completely, leaving the world washed clean under starlight. The apple orchard stretched out before her, rows of trees heavy with fruit that should have been harvested weeks ago. Work that needed doing. Responsibility. The thought made her break out in a cold sweat. She'd walked away from responsibility when Marcus died, when fighting for people had cost her everything, including her faith in fighting at all. The Department of Children and Families had wanted to discuss learning from the experience and improved protocols, as if Marcus's death were a policy problem rather than the predictable result of a system that protected adults better than children. Maya had stopped listening after the word protocols. She'd stopped believing that individuals could matter more than bureaucratic procedures, that love could triumph over institutional inertia, that trying harder would ever be enough. But now she was holding evidence of a love story that had endured 47 years of separation, that had somehow led Ezra to wait for her specifically, a granddaughter he'd never met, to stumble into his barn on the night he died. Either that was the most elaborate coincidence in human history, or some forces were larger than the cynicism she'd wrapped around herself like armor. Maya returned to the letters, hands shaking as she untied another ribbon. These were addressed to Ezra, written in her grandmother's careful English, dated from the 1980s and 1990s. References to our daughter and the granddaughter I've told you about, and when the time is right, she'll find her way to you. As if her grandmother had known, somehow, that Maya would need this place exactly when she'd given up on needing anything. The weight of that possibility settled over her like a stone, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to examine. Maya closed the tin carefully and sat back against the kitchen cabinets, surrounded by the evidence of other people's faith in futures they'd never lived to see. Outside, the first pale hint of dawn touched the horizon. Maya watched the sky lighten through the kitchen window, still clutching the tin of letters like a lifeline to something she didn't fully understand. 3 years of drifting had taught her to recognize moments of decision, the precise instant when forward motion required choosing a direction instead of simply running away. This was that moment. She could walk out that front door, drive to the lawyer's office, and politely decline Ezra's inheritance. Sign whatever papers would transfer the farm to someone more deserving, someone who hadn't spent 3 years perfecting the art of caring about nothing. Return to her Honda Civic and the safety of perpetual motion, where attachment was impossible and disappointment couldn't reach her. But her hands wouldn't release the tin. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through the contacts she hadn't called in months. Sarah Martinez, her former supervisor at DCF, who'd sent increasingly worried voicemails for the first year before giving up. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the therapist she'd seen exactly twice before deciding that talking about Marcus's death wouldn't bring him back. Her cousin Jennifer in Seattle, who still sent Christmas cards to Maya's old address, hoping someone would forward them. People who'd once mattered, who'd tried to anchor her to a life that made sense. Maya had cut every one of those ties deliberately, methodically, like a ship's captain severing mooring lines in a storm. But Ezra and her grandmother had spent 47 years refusing to sever their connection, writing letters across an impossible distance, preserving a love story that had somehow survived her grandmother's marriage to another man, the birth of children who weren't Ezra's, decades of separation and silence. They'd maintained faith in something Maya couldn't even name. She stood slowly, tin tucked under her arm, and walked through the farmhouse as dawn spread across the hills. The place was larger than it appeared from outside. 4 bedrooms upstairs, a study lined with books about organic farming and sustainable agriculture, a sunroom facing the orchard where someone had left reading glasses on an open copy obsolete spring. Evidence of a life lived deliberately, purposefully, with attention to growing things rather than abandoning them. In the main bedroom, Maya found more photographs. Ezra at various ages, always alone but never looking lonely. Tending gardens, harvesting apples, standing beside farm equipment with the satisfied expression of someone who understood his place in the world. And mixed throughout, pictures of her grandmother at different stages of life, wedding photos with Maya's grandfather, baby pictures of Maya's mother, elementary school portraits that must include Maya herself, though she was too young to recognize her own face. He'd been watching her family from a distance all these years, collecting fragments of the life he couldn't share. Maya sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was inheriting. Not just property or money, but the weight of other people's dreams, their faith in connections that transcended time and geography. Her grandmother had believed Maya would find her way here eventually. Ezra had structured his entire life around that possibility. What if they were wrong? What if she was just a broken social worker who'd lost her capacity for hope along with everything else that had once defined her? What if she accepted this gift and destroyed it the way she'd destroyed her career, her relationships, her belief in her own ability to help anyone? But as she sat surrounded by evidence of Ezra's solitary devotion, Maya realized she was asking the wrong question. The question wasn't whether she deserved this inheritance or could live up to its implications. The question was whether she had the courage to try. Her phone buzzed, a text from the auto shop in town where she'd had her Honda's transmission serviced 6 months ago. Maya, hoping you're still in the area. Could use reliable help if you're interested in staying put for a while. Even Joe at the garage had seen something in her worth keeping around. Maybe the possibility of belonging wasn't as foreign as she'd convinced herself. Maya walked back downstairs to the kitchen window and looked out at the orchard. The apple trees needed harvesting, the fence line required repair, and the barn where she'd met Ezra would need cleaning before winter. Work that mattered, that produced something tangible instead of just preventing disaster. A different kind of helping than she'd attempted before. She pulled out her phone and, before she could reconsider, typed a response to Joe, "Yes. I think I'm staying." The words felt strange on the screen, an admission of intention instead of escape. Maya hit send before fear could override hope, then sat back against the kitchen counter and waited for Thomas Hartwell's office to open. By the time she walked into the lawyer's office at 9 a.m., Maya had already called her cousin Jennifer. The conversation had been awkward, full of explanations she wasn't ready to give, but Jennifer had cried when Maya said she might be settling down somewhere. "I knew you'd find your way home eventually," Jennifer had said, as if she'd inherited some of their grandmother's faith in impossible things. Maybe she had. Thomas Hartwell's office occupied the second floor of a Victorian building on Main Street, its windows overlooking a town square that looked like it hadn't changed since Maya's grandmother was young. The lawyer himself was perhaps 60, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the unhurried manner of someone who'd spent decades helping neighbors navigate life's complexities rather than billable hours. "I have to admit, Miss Chen, I wasn't entirely certain you'd come," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his mahogany desk. "Ezra was convinced you would, but inheritance situations can be overwhelming." Maya settled into the chair, the blue tin balanced on her lap. "I found some letters last night. In the farmhouse." Hartwell nodded, unsurprised. "He told me you might." Ezra was very specific about the timing of everything, that you should discover certain things in the right order. He pulled out a thick file. "There are additional documents he wanted you to see, but only after you decided whether to accept the inheritance." "What kind of documents?" "Property surveys, financial records, correspondence with agricultural extension services, but also," he hesitated, "personal papers related to your mother's birth, your grandmother's reasons for leaving Vermont, things that might be difficult to read." Maya's stomach tightened. The letters from last night had hinted at family disapproval, but she sensed there were darker truths still hidden. "How much did he tell you about their relationship?" "Enough to understand why your grandmother's family forced her to leave. 1975 wasn't an easy time to be an interracial couple in rural Vermont. There were incidents." Hartwell's voice carried careful neutrality, but Maya caught the weight beneath his words. "What kind of incidents?" "Property damage. Threats. Your grandmother was quite young, barely 19 when your mother was born. Her family decided the situation was too dangerous." He leaned back in his chair. Ezra never blamed her for the choice they made, but he never stopped hoping she'd return, or that someday her family might. Maya thought of her grandmother's careful silence about Vermont, the way she'd deflected questions about Maya's grandfather's bitterness toward that place. How many secrets had 3 generations of women carried, protecting each other from truths too painful to share? "The farm is worth how much exactly?" Maya asked, needing to ground herself in practical concerns. Conservative estimate? 3.2 million. The land alone is valuable, but Ezra spent 50 years developing it as a premier organic operation. His waiting list for CSA shares stretches 2 years out. The agricultural infrastructure is worth almost as much as the property. $3.2 million. Maya had been surviving on odd jobs and savings that were nearly depleted. The magnitude of the inheritance felt surreal, like winning a lottery she'd never entered. There's one condition, Hartwell continued. Ezra wanted the farm to remain operational. You can sell it, but only to buyers who'll continue the agricultural mission. And there's a right of first refusal clause. If you decide to leave, the land gets offered to the Vermont Land Trust to preserve as working farmland in perpetuity. He really thought this through. Ezra had 47 years to plan. He wanted to ensure that whatever happened, the land would be protected. Hartwell pulled out another document. He also established a trust fund for farm operations. Equipment maintenance, seasonal labor costs, marketing expenses. You wouldn't have to worry about startup capital. Maya stared at the papers spread across the desk, each one representing decisions Ezra had made with absolute faith that she would someday sit in this chair. The weight of that trust was almost unbearable. Was I the only option? If I hadn't shown up, what would have happened? The farm would have gone to the land trust immediately. But Ezra never doubted you'd find your way there. Hartwell studied her face. He said your grandmother had described you in her letters, someone who needed to grow things more than she knew. Before Maya could respond, the office door burst open without a knock. A woman about Maya's age strode in, her expression thunderous. Designer clothes, perfectly styled blonde hair, and the kind of righteous anger that came with assumed entitlement. "Tom, I need to speak with you about the Whitmore situation," she announced, then stopped short when she saw Maya. "Oh, you must be the supposed inheritor." Hartwell sighed. "Maya, this is Patricia Brennan. Her family owns the adjacent property." Patricia's smile was sharp as winter. "Which is why I'm here, actually. The Brennan family has been trying to purchase that farm for over a decade. Now that dear old Ezra is gone, surely we can work something out? I'm prepared to offer well above market value. The inheritance isn't even finalized," Maya said carefully. "Oh, please. Everyone knows you're some sort of drifter who stumbled onto a good thing. This is a working farm, not a vacation property. It needs someone who understands the community, the politics, the relationships that keep places like this viable." Maya felt something cold settle in her chest. The familiar sensation of being dismissed, underestimated, written off by people who'd decided her worth before bothering to know her story. "The farm isn't for sale," she heard herself say. Patricia's perfectly composed expression cracked for just a moment before reassembling into patronizing concern. "I think you might be making a hasty decision. You don't understand what you're taking on." "Neither did Ezra when he started farming," Maya replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But he figured it out. Ezra was born here. He knew these people, these systems. You're an outsider who doesn't understand that farming isn't just about planting seeds and hoping for the best." Patricia's tone grew sharper. "The Brennan family has deep roots in this community. We know how to work with local government, how to navigate agricultural regulations, how to maintain relationships with suppliers and buyers. You'll be starting from nothing." Hartwell cleared his throat. "Perhaps this conversation would be better held at another time." "No," Maya interrupted, standing slowly. The blue tin remained clutched in her hands like armor. "Let's talk about it now. What exactly are you offering?" Patricia's eyes gleamed with anticipated victory. $4 million, cash, well above any appraisal value, and you'd be free to walk away without any of the headaches of actually running a farm operation. $4 million. Maya's mind reeled at the number. Enough money to disappear completely, to buy anonymity in some distant city where no one would ever find her. Enough to ensure she'd never have to depend on anyone or anything again. "The offer expires in 72 hours, Patricia continued, pulling out a business card. "After that, well, you'll discover how expensive it is to maintain a property like this. Equipment failures, crop diseases, labor shortages, weather disasters. Most people don't last 2 seasons. Maya took the card, studying Patricia's confident expression. This woman had clearly done her research. She knew about Maya's transient lifestyle, probably knew about her abandoned social work career and the reasons she'd left Massachusetts. Patricia was counting on Maya's fear of commitment, her pattern of running when things got complicated. What Patricia didn't know was that Maya had spent 3 years learning the difference between strategic retreat and cowardice. She'd run from her job at DCF because staying would have meant accepting a system that prioritized bureaucracy over children's lives. She'd run from her apartment, her relationships, her entire former existence because they'd become reminders of her failure to save Marcus. But inheriting this farm wasn't about saving anyone. It was about choosing to build something instead of just preventing disaster. "I'll think about your offer," Maya said finally. Patricia smiled triumphantly. "Smart choice. Tom has my number when you're ready to discuss details." After she left, the office felt suddenly quiet. Hartwell shuffled his papers with deliberate calm, giving Maya time to process what had just happened. "How long have the Brennans wanted the property?" Maya asked. "Since Ezra's first heart attack 5 years ago. Patricia's family develops agricultural land for residential use. They subdivide the farm into luxury home lots within a year of purchase." He paused. Ezra knew that when he structured the inheritance. It's why the agricultural preservation clause exists. She seemed pretty confident I'd sell. People like Patricia often mistake kindness for weakness, solitude for incompetence. She doesn't understand that choosing to be alone isn't the same as being unable to connect with others. Maya thought about the past 3 years, how she'd deliberately severed connections to protect herself from further disappointment. But sitting in Ezra's farmhouse last night, reading her grandmother's letters, she'd felt something she almost forgotten. The possibility that isolation might be a choice rather than an inevitable fate. What happens if I accept the inheritance and fail? If Patricia's right about my inexperience? Hartwell leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same careful attention she'd once used to assess families in crisis. Ezra spent 50 years building that operation. The infrastructure is solid, the customer base is established, and there are longtime employees who know every aspect of the work. You wouldn't be starting from scratch, but I'd still be responsible for all of it. Yes. And responsibility can be terrifying when you're used to having nothing to lose. His voice carried unexpected understanding. But Ezra believed your grandmother's instincts about you. She wrote that you had a gift for nurturing things back to health, even when you'd given up on healing yourself. Maya felt tears threaten for the first time since entering his office. Her grandmother had seen something in her that Maya had lost sight of completely, some capacity for growth that had survived even Marcus's death and her subsequent flight from everything that mattered. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course. But Maya?" Hartwell's expression grew serious. "Don't let Patricia Brennan's assumptions about your worthiness influence your decision. This inheritance isn't about proving yourself to strangers. It's about honoring the faith two people maintained across decades of separation." Maya nodded and stood to leave. Patricia's business card burning in her pocket like a challenge and the tin of letters solid in her arms like an anchor. Outside, Millbrook's main street bustled with the quiet energy of a community that had learned to endure, and Maya realized she was about to discover whether she had that same capacity for permanence. Maya sat in her Honda outside Hartwell's office for 20 minutes, engine running, Patricia's business card balanced against the steering wheel. $4 million. The number pulsed through her mind like a migraine, impossible to ignore. Enough money to disappear completely, to vanish into anonymity where no one would ever again look at her with expectations she couldn't meet. Her phone rang, an unknown Vermont number. "Maya Chen, this is Sam Rodriguez from Whitmore Farm. Tom Hartwell gave me your number." The voice was weathered, practical. "I've been managing Ezra's operation for the past 15 years. Wondered if we could talk." Maya's stomach clenched. Here it was. the first test of whether she could handle the reality behind Hartwell's reassurances about established infrastructure and experienced employees. "I'm still deciding about the inheritance," she said carefully. "I know. That's why I'm calling. The fall harvest is already 2 weeks behind schedule because of the legal delays. We've got 60 CSA members expecting their final delivery boxes and 3 restaurants in Burlington depending on our late-season greens. If we don't move fast, the whole operation loses credibility for next year." Maya stared through her windshield at Millbrook's placid Main Street, understanding with sudden clarity that this wasn't just about inheriting property. Real people depended on decisions she made, employees who needed work, customers who'd planned their meals around Whitmore produce, businesses that had built relationships with Ezra over decades. How many employees? 8 seasonal workers, 3 year-round. "I've been keeping everyone on payroll from the farm's operating account, but that won't last another week without an owner's signature on decisions." The weight of other people's livelihoods settled on Maya's shoulders like stones. This was exactly the kind of responsibility she'd been running from, the crushing awareness that her choices affected lives beyond her own. "What happens if I can't do this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Sam's pause carried more understanding than judgment. "Then we harvest what we can, fulfill our commitments for this season, and help you transition the operation to new ownership." "But Maya? Ezra spent months talking about you before he died. He wasn't gambling on a stranger, he was betting on family." After ending the call, Maya drove back to the farmhouse in a daze. The afternoon sun slanted across the orchard, illuminating rows of apple trees heavy with unharvested fruit. Evidence of work left undone, of a cycle interrupted by death and bureaucracy. She thought of Marcus in his final foster placement, how bureaucratic delays had prevented her from moving him to safety in time. Now she was on the other side of those delays, the person whose indecision was creating consequences for others. Inside the farmhouse, Maya spread Patricia's business card, Hartwell's inheritance documents, and her grandmother's letters across the kitchen table. 3 different futures arranged before her like tarot cards: escape, responsibility, and the mystery of choices made by people who'd believed in love across impossible distances. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her cousin Jennifer found some of Grandma's things in Mom's attic. Pictures of her in Vermont before she met Grandpa. She looked so happy. "Think you'd want to see them?" Maya stared at the message, understanding that even her family was somehow conspiring to keep her tethered to this place, this inheritance she'd never asked for. Her grandmother's happiness before marriage, before compromise, before the long silence about her first love. What if Maya was the only one left who could honor the truth of that earlier joy? She walked outside as the sun began to set, following a path that led through the orchard toward the fields where winter vegetables grew in neat rows. The work was visible everywhere, in the carefully maintained irrigation lines, the precisely spaced plantings, the barn where equipment sat ready for harvest. 50 years of daily decisions, seasonal rhythms, the patient accumulation of knowledge about soil and weather, and the delicate balance required to coax food from the earth. This was what Ezra had been offering her, not just property or money, but a life structure built around growth instead of loss prevention. Work that produced something tangible instead of just trying to stop disasters that might happen anyway. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled to Patricia's contact information. $4 million. Freedom from expectations, from the possibility of failing people who depended on her, from the crushing weight of being responsible for something larger than her own survival. But as she stood surrounded by evidence of Ezra's faith, in the land, in her grandmother's memory, in Maya's capacity to choose connection over isolation, she realized that running had never actually freed her from anything. It had only delayed the moment when she'd have to decide who she wanted to be. Her finger hovered over Patricia's number, trembling with the magnitude of the choice. Everything she'd learned about love, loss, and the courage required to build something permanent balanced on this single decision. Maya's finger pressed the call button before she could change her mind. "Patricia? It's Maya Chen. I've made my decision." "Wonderful," Patricia's voice practically purred through the phone. "I knew you'd see reason. We can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow." I'm not selling. The silence stretched so long Maya wondered if the call had dropped. When Patricia spoke again, her tone had shifted from triumph to ice. You're making a serious mistake. But don't worry. I'll be here when reality sets in. Maya ended the call, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She'd done it. She'd chosen the farm, chosen Ezra's faith, chosen to honor whatever connection had drawn her grandmother to this place decades ago. For the first time in 3 years, she'd committed to something larger than her own survival. The relief lasted exactly 12 hours. Maya woke the next morning to the sound of sirens. Through the farmhouse windows, she could see smoke rising from the direction of the barn. She threw on clothes and ran across the yard, where she found Sam Rodriguez and 2 firefighters standing beside the smoldering remains of what had been the farm's equipment storage. Started around 4 a.m., Sam said grimly. Lost the tractor, the cultivator, and about $60,000 worth of harvesting equipment. Maya stared at the destruction, her newfound resolve crumbling to ash. The smell of burned metal and plastic filled the air, carrying with it the acrid reality of what she'd actually inherited. Not just property and potential, but vulnerability and risk. Was it electrical? She asked, though something in Sam's expression told her she wouldn't like the answer. Fire marshal will investigate, but the burn pattern looks suspicious. Too concentrated, too complete. He kicked at a piece of twisted metal, someone who knew where to do the most damage. Patricia Brennan. Maya didn't have to voice the thought. It hung between them like smoke. Less than 24 hours after rejecting the Brennans' offer, the farm's operational heart had been destroyed. How much will it cost to replace everything? More than we have in operating funds. Without equipment, we can't finish the harvest. Without harvest income, we can't buy new equipment. Sam's weathered face was grim. Insurance might cover some of it, but that'll take months to process. The growing season doesn't wait. Maya's phone rang. Patricia Brennan's name appeared on the screen. I heard about your unfortunate incident. Patricia's voice carried fake sympathy. Such a shame. But perhaps this is the universe telling you something? My offer still stands, though I might need to adjust it slightly given the property's reduced value. 3.5 million, Patricia continued before Maya could respond. Still more than generous for land with burned-out infrastructure. Unless you'd prefer to spend the next 6 months fighting insurance companies and trying to rebuild with money you don't have? Maya ended the call without responding, but Patricia's words echoed in her head. The woman was right. Maya had no reserve funds, no experience with agricultural insurance, no knowledge of equipment dealers or harvest schedules. Every system Ezra had spent 50 years building could collapse because Maya had been naive enough to think inheritance meant anything more than signing papers. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Sam, 3 CSA members called this morning to cancel their memberships. Word's getting out about the equipment loss. People are worried about getting their final deliveries. Then another, Burlington restaurant, pulled their standing order. Said they need reliable suppliers. Maya sank onto the farmhouse steps, watching the last wisps of smoke rise from the barn. This was exactly what she'd been running from, the moment when other people's trust in her proved misplaced, when her limitations caused real harm to real lives. 8 employees who wouldn't have jobs, 60 CSA members who'd lose their food source, a community operation that would disappear because she'd been arrogant enough to think she could step into Ezra's shoes. Marcus's face flickered in her memory. Not as he'd been when she failed to save him, but as he'd been in their first meeting, looking at her with the same kind of desperate hope Ezra must have carried for 47 years. The hope that someone would finally choose to stay, to fight, to build something lasting despite the risks. Maya pulled out Patricia's business card one more time. $3.5 million. Enough to pay the farm's employees for the rest of the season to ensure they found other work before winter. Enough to walk away without destroying more lives through her inexperience. She dialed the number, her finger steady this time. Sometimes the most loving choice was knowing when to let go. Patricia? It's Maya Chen. Let's talk about that sale. Actually, Maya said into the phone, her voice catching on the word. I need to call you back. She hung up before Patricia could respond, staring at the burned barn ruins. Something was wrong with this picture, not just the fire, but her reaction to it 3 years ago when Marcus died. She'd run because the system had failed him despite her best efforts. She'd been fighting an institution that prioritized bureaucracy over children's lives, pushing against barriers she couldn't change. But this was different. This was sabotage. Maya walked toward the barn, studying the burn patterns Sam had pointed out. Too concentrated, too complete. She'd seen enough house fires during her social work years to recognize the difference between accident and intention. Someone had deliberately destroyed the equipment, banking on her inexperience and fear to drive her toward the exact decision she'd almost made. Her phone rang again, Patricia calling back. Maya let it go to voicemail. Instead, she called Sam. The equipment that burned, how much of the harvest could we complete without it? Maybe 40%. The root vegetables need machine harvesting, and the processing equipment for the value-added products was all in that barn. Sam's voice carried confusion. Maya, I thought you were going to… What if we rented equipment or hired contractors? A pause. It's possible, but expensive. And finding available equipment this late in the season, he trailed off. Why? I thought you were ready to sell. Maya looked across the fields where late-season vegetables waited for harvest. Then at the farmhouse where her grandmother's letters sat on the kitchen table. Patricia called me within hours of the fire. She knew exactly what had burned and how much it would cost to replace. She adjusted her offer like she'd been waiting for this to happen. You think the Brennans… I think someone wants me to believe I can't handle this inheritance. And for a minute, they succeeded. The revelation felt like cold water hitting her face. She'd been so focused on her own fears, her history of failure, her pattern of running, that she'd missed the obvious truth. This wasn't about her incompetence or the universe sending messages. This was about people who'd been waiting years to acquire this land, who wouldn't let one inconvenient heir stand in their way. Sam, how many farms has Patricia's family developed in the past decade? 4 that I know of. All heritage properties, all sold by heirs who couldn't handle the financial pressure. His voice grew grim with understanding. Maya, if they're willing to commit arson, they're not going to stop with one fire. Maya felt something crystallize in her chest. Not the desperate determination that had driven her social work years, but cold, clear anger. Which means running away won't actually protect anyone. They'll just target the next owner, or the next. She thought about Marcus again, but this time the memory carried different weight. She'd failed to save him because the system was designed to prevent the kind of quick action his situation required. But she'd never stopped trying. She'd fought until the end, and when the institutional barriers proved insurmountable, she'd burned out rather than accept a compromise that would have meant abandoning other children. Maybe that hadn't been failure. Maybe that had been integrity. Sam, what would Ezra have done if someone burned his barn? A chuckle carried through the phone, rebuilt it bigger and better, then installed security cameras and motion sensors. Ezra didn't back down from fights, especially when they involved protecting what he'd built. Maya walked back toward the farmhouse, her grandmother's letters waiting on the kitchen table. Love that had survived family prejudice, geographic separation, and 47 years of silence. If Mylin and Ezra had found ways to honor their connection despite impossible obstacles, maybe Maya could find ways to honor their faith in her. Her phone buzzed with another text from Patricia. Offer expires at 5 p.m. today. After that, you're on your own. Maya smiled grimly. She'd been on her own for 3 years. The difference now was that she wasn't alone. She called Sam back. I need you to make a list of every piece of equipment we lost and 3 quotes for replacements. Rental options, too. And I want security cameras installed on every building by the end of the week. Maya, the insurance money will come eventually. Until then, we're going to get creative. How many CSA members actually canceled? 3 out of 60. Most people are willing to wait if they know we're fighting. Then we fight. We'll rent what we need, hire contractors for what we can't handle ourselves, and prove that burning down a barn isn't enough to destroy something 50 years in the making. After ending the call, Maya sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. If the Brennans wanted to play dirty, she'd need to understand exactly who she was fighting and what resources she had available. But for the first time since inheriting the farm, she felt like herself again. Not the broken social worker who'd fled Massachusetts, but the person who'd spent years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The farm was worth fighting for, and so was she. Maya's laptop screen filled with information about Brennan Agricultural Holdings as the morning light strengthened outside the farmhouse windows. What she found made her stomach clench with familiar dread, the same pattern repeated across 4 different heritage farms over the past decade. Equipment failures, mysterious fires, insurance delays, and conveniently timed cash offers that rescued desperate heirs from financial ruin. The Hartwell farm in 2019, barn fire destroyed harvesting equipment 2 weeks before apple season, sold to Brennan Holdings 3 months later. The Morrison Dairy in 2021, feed storage burned, cattle had to be sold at a loss. Property developed into luxury condominiums within 18 months. Each case followed the same script Patricia had just tried with Maya: create a crisis, apply financial pressure, then swoop in as the reasonable solution. "You bastards," Maya whispered to the screen. But alongside the anger came something else: relief. This wasn't about her incompetence or some cosmic sign that she wasn't meant to inherit Ezra's legacy. This was a deliberate campaign to steal what belonged to her. Her phone rang. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," her cousin said. "I heard about the farm through Mom's church network. Are you okay?" Maya's throat tightened. She'd grown so accustomed to handling crises alone that even Jennifer's simple concern felt overwhelming. "I'm fine, just dealing with some equipment issues." "Maya, I found those pictures I mentioned. Grandma in Vermont, before she met Grandpa. There's something else too, letters. She kept them in a music box, and they're addressed to someone named Ezra." Maya's breath caught. More correspondence between her grandmother and Ezra, hidden away for decades. "What do they say?" "I haven't read them all, but the last one—" Jennifer paused. "She wrote it after Mom was born. She talks about keeping a secret, about protecting someone she couldn't have but never stopped loving." "Maya, I think these might explain why that farmer left you his land. Can you bring them? Today, if possible? I'm already in the car, should be there by noon." After hanging up, Maya returned to her research with renewed focus. If she was going to fight the Brennans, she needed to understand their weaknesses as well as their tactics. What she discovered was a company built on aggressive expansion and leveraged debt, successful as long as property values kept rising, but vulnerable if their development projects faced delays or complications. Maya's social work background kicked in, the same investigative instincts that had helped her build cases for children in dangerous situations. She pulled up zoning records, environmental impact studies, and planning commission minutes from the Brennans' previous developments. A pattern emerged: corners cut, regulations skirted, and a trail of community opposition that had been steamrolled by political connections and financial pressure. But they'd never faced opposition from someone who knew how to work within systems, who understood that bureaucracy could be a weapon as well as an obstacle. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sam. "Equipment rental place in Burlington has what we need. $3,000 a week for the harvester, but they're booked solid through October. Unless..." She called him immediately. "Unless what?" "Unless we can prove the rental is to replace equipment lost to arson. They have emergency provisions for farmers facing deliberate sabotage, but we'd need a police report stating the fire was intentionally set." The fire marshal mentioned the burn pattern looked suspicious. "Can you get me his contact information?" While Sam texted her the details, Maya began making notes on a legal pad, action items that felt familiar from her case management days. Document everything, build evidence, establish a paper trail that would protect her position and potentially expose the Brennans' pattern of predatory behavior. A knock at the door interrupted her planning. Maya opened it to find Tom Hartwell standing on the porch, his usually composed expression troubled. "I heard about the fire," he said. "I wanted to check on you personally and to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "For not warning you more directly about what you might face. I've represented 3 families who sold to the Brennans after similar incidents. I suspected the pattern wasn't coincidental, but I couldn't prove anything. Maya stepped aside to let him enter. What would it take to prove it? Hartwell's eyes sharpened at her tone. Evidence of coordination between incidents, documentation of the Brennans' prior knowledge, or testimony from someone willing to admit they were involved in the sabotage. He studied her face. Are you planning to fight this? I'm planning to finish what Ezra started. And if that means exposing the Brennans' methods, even better. Maya, these people have resources you can't imagine. Political connections, financial backing, and a willingness to escalate beyond property damage if necessary. I spent 8 years fighting for children who had no one else in their corner. The Brennans might have money and connections, but I have something they don't. Nothing left to lose and no reason to back down. Hartwell was quiet for a moment, then pulled a business card from his wallet. This is a friend of mine who investigates insurance fraud. If you're serious about fighting, you'll need professional help documenting what's been done to you. As he left, Maya looked at the card, then at her growing list of action items. For the first time in 3 years, she was building something instead of just surviving. And it felt like coming home. Maya stared at the insurance investigator's business card, then at her laptop screen filled with evidence of the Brennans' systematic targeting of heritage farms. The familiar weight of case building settled over her shoulders, not the desperate scramble to save Marcus that had consumed her 3 years ago, but the methodical process of constructing an unshakable foundation for justice. She dialed the number Hartwell had given her. Rick Castellanos, a gravelly voice answered. My name is Maya Chen. Tom Hartwell said you investigate insurance fraud involving agricultural properties. Depends on what kind of fraud we're talking about, and whether you can pay my rates. Maya looked around the farmhouse. At Ezra's simple furniture, her grandmother's letters still scattered on the table, the view of fields that represented both legacy and target. Someone burned down my barn to force me to sell. I think it's part of a pattern going back years. A pause. Brennan Agricultural Holdings? Maya's breath caught. You know about them? I've been tracking suspicious claims in Vermont farm country for 18 months. Problem is, proving deliberate sabotage requires more than pattern recognition. It requires evidence that will hold up in court. His tone sharpened with interest. What makes your case different? I'm not selling, and I'm not running. When can you meet? Before Maya could answer, gravel crunched in the driveway. Through the window, she watched Jennifer emerge from a silver SUV, carrying a wooden box that looked like it might contain decades of secrets. This afternoon, Maya told Castellanos, I'm expecting some additional evidence shortly. After scheduling the meeting, Maya opened the door as Jennifer approached the porch. Her cousin looked older than her 31 years. Worry lines etched around eyes that carried the same determined set Maya remembered from their childhood adventures. I drove straight through, Jennifer said, holding up the music box. Maya, after reading these letters, I understand why you had to come here. But I'm scared for you. They sat at the kitchen table as Jennifer opened the ornate box. Inside, beneath faded sheet music, lay a collection of letters tied with blue ribbon. Jennifer's hands shook slightly as she untied the bow. The earliest ones are from the 1950s, Jennifer said, pulling out yellowed envelopes. Love letters, mostly. But the later ones, she selected an envelope postmarked 1975. This was written 6 months after Mom was born. Maya unfolded the delicate paper, her grandmother's careful handwriting filling both sides. As she read, the pieces of her family's hidden history clicked into place with devastating clarity. My dearest Ezra. She has your eyes, not the color but the way she studies everything with such intense curiosity. James thinks she favors his side of the family and I let him believe it. How can I explain that every time I look at our daughter, I see the man I should have chosen instead of the one my parents demanded I marry? You asked if I regret my decision, and I must be honest. I regret the circumstances that made it necessary. But I cannot regret protecting you from my family's hatred or protecting our daughter from the knowledge that her very existence would be seen as shameful by the people who claim to love her. I will raise her to be brave in ways I was not. I will teach her that love transcends the boundaries others try to impose. And someday, when she is old enough to understand, I will tell her about the man in Vermont who tends his land with the same tenderness he once showed me. Until then, know that you are in every lullaby I sing, every story I tell, every dream I hold for her future. Forever yours in heart, Maylene. Maya set down the letter, her hands trembling. My mother was Ezra's daughter. There are more, Jennifer said quietly. Letters about Mom's childhood, about Grandma watching from a distance as Mom grew up, married, had you. Ezra knew about all of it. Grandma kept him informed about every milestone, every achievement, every heartbreak. Maya thought about Ezra's final moments, the certainty with which he'd claimed her as his heir. Not a stranger's desperate impulse, but the culmination of decades spent loving a granddaughter he'd never been allowed to meet. The weight of that love, patient, enduring, unconditional, settled around her like armor. Jennifer pulled out a photograph tucked between the letters. A young Maylin stood beside a tall, broad-shouldered man in front of a farmhouse Maya now recognized. Both were smiling with the unconscious joy of people who believed their love could overcome any obstacle. I found something else, Jennifer said, her voice careful. Birth records. Mom's biological father is listed as unknown, but there's a witness signature on the birth certificate. Thomas Hartwell Sr. Maya's pulse quickened. Tom Hartwell's father had been present at her mother's birth, had known the truth about Ezra's relationship with Maylin. The lawyer's concern for Maya's safety took on new dimensions. He wasn't just protecting a client, but honoring a family secret his own father had helped guard for 47 years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Brennan, deadline extended to tomorrow morning. Final offer, $3 million. After that, you'll face this alone. Maya looked at her grandmother's letters, at the photograph of love that had survived decades of separation, at Jennifer's worried face. Then she typed her response, I'm not alone, and I'm not selling. The final confrontation was coming, but Maya finally understood what she was fighting for. Not just a farm or an inheritance, but the completion of a love story that had waited 3 generations for its proper ending. Patricia Brennan's response came within minutes. Then you've chosen the hard way. Don't say we didn't warn you. Maya stared at the screen, then looked up at Jennifer. I need you to take those letters and go back to Massachusetts. Today. What? Maya, I just got here. They're escalating. That text is basically a threat. Maya's social worker instincts kicked in. The same protective drive that had once made her physically place herself between Marcus and his father. These letters are the only proof of my connection to Ezra. If something happens to them, then something happens to both of us, Jennifer said firmly. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Before Maya could argue, her phone rang. Rick Castellanos. Change of plans, his gravelly voice said without preamble. I just got a call from a client in Rutland. Brennan Crew showed up this morning to survey his property that's not even for sale. They're moving faster than usual, which means they're worried about something. What changed? Maya's pulse quickened. I told them I wasn't selling. And they decided to send a message to other potential problems. Smart, ruthless, but smart. A pause. How attached are you to sleeping in that farmhouse tonight? Maya looked around the kitchen where Ezra had eaten his meals alone for decades, waiting for a granddaughter he'd never expected to meet, where her grandmother's letters lay scattered on the table, proof of a love that had endured 47 years of separation, where she'd finally begun to feel like she belonged somewhere, very attached. Then we need to move fast. I'm 20 minutes out. Have whatever evidence you've gathered ready to review, and pack anything you can't afford to lose. We're going to give them what they don't expect, a target that shoots back. After hanging up, Maya turned to find Jennifer already repacking the letters. I'm not leaving, her cousin said. But I'm not stupid either. These go in my car where they're safe. Maya felt a rush of gratitude so intense it made her throat tight. For 3 years, she'd faced every crisis alone, convinced that asking for help was just another form of failure. But Jennifer's quiet determination reminded her of something she'd forgotten. Sometimes the strongest thing you could do was let people care about you. There's something else, Maya said. Tom Hartwell's father was present when my mother was born. He's known about my connection to Ezra for 47 years. This whole inheritance, it's not random kindness from a dying stranger. It's family taking care of family. Jennifer's eyes widened. Maya, if the lawyer's family has been protecting this secret for decades, then they'll have resources the Brennans don't know about. Records, documentation, maybe even other people who knew about Ezra and Mei Lin. Maya felt pieces clicking into place, the same satisfaction she'd once found in building bulletproof cases for endangered children. They've been playing a long game. Maybe it's time to find out how long. She called Tom Hartwell's office. His secretary put her through immediately. Maya, are you all right? I heard Patricia made contact. Mr. Hartwell, I need to ask you about your father, about what he knew regarding Ezra and my grandmother. A long silence. That's a conversation we should have in person, with witnesses. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Witnesses? People who've been waiting 47 years to tell their side of the story. Maya's breath caught. More people who'd known about the connection, who'd kept the secret and watched from a distance as Ezra lived alone on his farm, tending land he'd always intended to pass down through a bloodline no one was supposed to acknowledge. A car pulled into the driveway, a battered pickup truck that looked like it had seen hard use. Rick Castellanos emerged, a compact man in his 50s with the careful movements of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Maya watched him approach the house, then looked at Jennifer. Are you sure about staying? I've spent 31 years hearing Grandma's stories about the farm in Vermont where true love lived. I'm not missing the ending. Maya smiled, feeling something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The Brennans had made their final offer and shown their hand. Now it was her turn. She opened the door to meet Rick Castellanos, her grandmother's letters safe in Jennifer's hands, an appointment scheduled with people who'd been guarding family secrets since before she was born. For the first time since inheriting the farm, Maya felt like she was fighting with weapons that matched her opponents. The ultimate confrontation was beginning, but she was ready. Rick Castellanos moved with the economical grace of a man who'd learned to read danger in small details. His handshake was firm, his eyes cataloging everything from the farmhouse's defensible positions to the sight lines from the road. Maya recognized the assessment. She'd done similar calculations during home visits in neighborhoods where domestic violence could turn deadly without warning. Tell me about the barn fire, he said, settling at the kitchen table where Jennifer was organizing the letters into chronological order. Maya recounted the night she'd lost Ezra's equipment, watching Castellanos take notes in a compact handwriting that reminded her of police reports. When she finished, he looked up with the expression of someone who'd heard variations of the same story too many times. Textbook intimidation, he said. Burn something valuable but not irreplaceable. Send a message without crossing lines that bring federal attention. He gestured toward Jennifer. And you are? Family, Jennifer said simply. The cousin who brought proof that Maya's inheritance isn't random charity, it's bloodline property returning to the rightful heir. Castellanos examined one of Mei Lin's letters, his weathered features showing no surprise at the revelation. How long have you known about the connection? Since yesterday, Maya said. But Tom Hartwell's father knew. He was present when my mother was born 47 years ago. Tom Hartwell Sr. Castellanos nodded slowly. That explains a few things I've wondered about. Your inheritance had legal backing that went beyond standard will preparation. Someone spent decades making sure the paperwork was bulletproof. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number surveying your property line today. Access rights under Vermont agricultural assessment law. Don't interfere. Castellanos read the message over her shoulder. There's your escalation. They're going to find reasons to be on your land, establish presence, document any code violations or environmental issues they can manufacture. His expression hardened. Standard playbook. By tomorrow, you'll have surprise visits from building inspectors, environmental officers, maybe even child services if they think you have custody of any minors. Child services? Maya's blood chilled. She knew how easily those systems could be manipulated by people with resources and connections, how investigations could be triggered by anonymous calls alleging unsafe conditions. They use every pressure point available, Castellanos confirmed. The question is whether you're ready to pressure them back. Through the window, Maya saw a white SUV crawling along the road, slowing as it passed the farm entrance. The vehicle had Massachusetts plates and the aggressive styling that screamed corporate money. Even from a distance, she could see someone in the passenger seat taking photographs. "Jennifer," Maya said quietly, "take the letters to your car. Now." Her cousin moved without argument, gathering the correspondence with practiced efficiency. Maya watched the SUV complete its circuit and disappear around the bend, then turned back to Castellanos. What would it take to stop them permanently? Evidence of criminal conspiracy, documented pattern of harassment across multiple properties, testimony from someone inside their organization willing to detail their methods. He met her eyes. Or you could make them more afraid of you than you are of them. The words hit Maya like a revelation. For 3 years, she'd been running from confrontation, avoiding any situation that might expose her to the kind of systemic failure that had destroyed Marcus. But the Brennans weren't an overwhelmed social services department or a family court system stretched beyond capacity. They were predators who relied on their victims' isolation and fear. Maya had spent 8 years learning how to fight predators. "I want to file complaints," she said. "Property damage, harassment, intimidation. Create a paper trail that establishes their pattern of behavior." "Smart," Castellanos agreed. "But they'll escalate before those complaints gain traction. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Maya looked around the kitchen, at the table where Ezra had eaten alone for decades, at the window overlooking fields he'd tended while waiting for family that might never come, at the chair where he'd sat reading her grandmother's letters and planning for a granddaughter he'd never expected to meet. She thought about Marcus, about the system that had failed him despite her best efforts, about the 3 years she'd spent believing that fighting back only led to greater loss, about the love story that had waited 47 years for someone brave enough to complete it. "They picked the wrong target," Maya said, and meant it. A truck rumbled up the driveway, Sam's familiar pickup, followed by Tom Hartwell's sedan. Through the window, Maya could see other vehicles approaching, a convoy of people who'd apparently been waiting for this moment. "Your reinforcements?" Castellanos asked. Maya watched Tom Hartwell emerge from his car, followed by an elderly woman who moved with the careful dignity of someone carrying decades of secrets. Behind them, Sam was directing 2 other men toward the barn site, their purposeful movements suggesting they'd come prepared for more than conversation. "My family," Maya said, finally understanding what Ezra had really left her. Not just land and buildings, but connection to a community that had been protecting her interests since before she was born. The ultimate confrontation was about to begin, and she was no longer facing it alone. The elderly woman who stepped from Tom Hartwell's sedan moved with a measured dignity that spoke of secrets carefully guarded for decades. As she approached the farmhouse, Maya recognized something familiar in her bearing, the same quiet strength she'd seen in her grandmother's faded photographs. "Maya Chen," the woman said, extending a weathered hand. "I'm Dorothy Hartwell, Tom's mother. I've been waiting 47 years to meet you." Through the kitchen window, Maya watched more vehicles arrive. Sam emerged from his truck with 2 men who carried themselves like contractors, but their alert postures suggested different expertise. Jennifer returned from securing the letters, her face tight with concern as she counted the growing assembly. "Mrs. Hartwell," Tom said carefully, "perhaps we should explain before—" "Before what?" Dorothy's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Before Maya understands that half this county has been protecting her inheritance since before she was born? That her arrival isn't a surprise, but something we've been preparing for?" Castellanos shifted in his chair, his professional instincts clearly engaged. How many people knew about Maya's connection to Ezra? "Enough," Dorothy said, settling at the kitchen table with the careful movements of someone whose bones carried decades of worry. Tom's father delivered Mei Lin's baby in secret. The local doctor was drunk again, so they called Thomas. He'd been a medic in Korea. He held that beautiful little girl and listened to Mei Lin whisper Ezra's name between tears. Maya felt the weight of hidden history settling around her. You all knew my mother was Ezra's daughter. We knew love doesn't follow the rules society tries to impose, Dorothy said. We also knew that acknowledging the truth would have destroyed 3 lives instead of protecting them. Her eyes found Maya's with startling intensity. Ezra spent 47 years preparing for this moment, not just hoping you'd inherit his farm, but knowing you'd need allies when you did. A sharp knock interrupted the conversation. Through the front window, Maya saw Patricia Brennan flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. Behind them, a van marked Environmental Assessment Services had pulled into the driveway without invitation. They're not waiting, Castellanos observed, rising from his chair with fluid precision. Mrs. Hartwell, how committed is this community to protecting Maya's interests? Dorothy's smile held steel beneath courtesy. Son, we've been fighting people like the Brennans since before you were born. The difference is we play the long game. Maya watched Patricia approach the porch, her confidence suggesting she expected this visit to end the dispute permanently. The weight of decision settled over Maya like physical pressure. She could retreat, call the lawyers, let other people fight this battle while she found safety in distance. Or she could finally stop running from confrontation. Jennifer, Maya said quietly, I need you to leave, now. Drive straight back to Massachusetts and don't look back. Maya, no. This is about to get ugly, and I won't risk you getting caught in the crossfire. Maya met her cousin's eyes with the same intensity she'd once used to convince endangered children to trust her protection. Those letters are the only proof of my family's history. If something happens to them, Jennifer's face crumpled with understanding. You're not planning to walk away, are you? I tried walking away for 3 years, Maya said. It doesn't work. Some fights find you regardless. Through the window, she watched Patricia direct the environmental crew toward the barn site, where Maya had been planning to rebuild. The message was clear. Every aspect of the property would be scrutinized, documented, challenged until Maya either surrendered or made a mistake they could exploit. But as Jennifer gathered her keys with reluctant acceptance, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced since losing Marcus. The absolute clarity that came from having nothing left to lose except the things that truly mattered. Go, Maya told her cousin. Protect our grandmother's story. Make sure someone remembers why this all started. Jennifer embraced her fiercely, whispering, Grandma would be proud of you. Maya watched her cousin drive away, carrying 47 years of love letters and family secrets to safety. The sacrifice cut deeper than she'd expected, losing Jennifer's support, her connection to the life she'd known, the possibility of retreat. Patricia Brennan knocked again, more insistently. Dorothy Hartwell stood, straightening her shoulders with the bearing of someone who'd faced difficult battles before. Ezra knew this day would come. He also knew you'd be strong enough to handle it. Maya looked around the kitchen one final time, at the evidence of Ezra's patient devotion, at the community that had gathered to honor a 47-year-old promise, at the confrontation waiting beyond the door. The cost of winning would be measured in relationships lost, safety abandoned, and the comfortable anonymity she'd wrapped around herself like armor. But some inheritances were worth any price. Maya opened the door to face Patricia Brennan, no longer running from the fight that had been waiting for her all along. Patricia Brennan stood on the porch with the poised confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. Her 2 companions, expensive suits that screamed corporate law, flanked her like bookends of intimidation. Behind them, the environmental crew was already unpacking equipment near the barn foundation. Miss Chen, Patricia said, her smile sharp as winter glass. I think we need to discuss your situation more frankly. Maya stepped onto the porch, leaving the door open behind her. She could feel Dorothy Hartwell's presence in the kitchen, solid and reassuring as ancient bedrock. Castellanos had moved to the window where he could observe the environmental crew's activities. My situation seems clear enough, Maya replied. I own this property. You want it. I'm not selling. Actually, ownership might be more complicated than you think. Patricia gestured toward the crew setting up ground-penetrating equipment. Environmental assessments sometimes reveal irregularities, contamination that makes land unsuitable for development, agricultural violations that trigger significant fines. Her tone carried the casual cruelty of someone delivering practiced threats. The cleanup costs alone could exceed the property's value. Maya watched the crew work, recognizing the performance for what it was: theater designed to demonstrate helplessness in the face of superior resources. 3 years ago, she might have been intimidated. 3 years of living in her car had taught her that survival often depended on refusing to show fear. "Interesting timing," Maya said. "You make an offer Monday, I refuse Tuesday, and by Thursday you've discovered environmental concerns?" Patricia's smile never wavered. "Due diligence requires thorough investigation. We can't risk acquiring contaminated property." Through the kitchen window, Maya caught movement, Sam directing his companions around the side of the house with purposeful efficiency. Whatever Dorothy Hartwell had meant about playing the long game, it apparently involved more than conversation. "The barn fire last week," Maya continued, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Was that part of your environmental investigation too?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Patricia's features. "I wouldn't know anything about that." "Of course not. Just like you wouldn't know about the late-night property surveys or the photographers documenting my daily routines." Maya stepped closer, drawing on 8 years of experience confronting people who hurt children. "Here's what I know about bullies, Patricia. They rely on their targets being isolated and afraid." Behind Patricia, one of the suits shifted uncomfortably. The environmental crew had stopped their setup to watch the confrontation, apparently sensing the shift in dynamics. "Ms. Chen," the suit said, his tone attempting professional courtesy, "perhaps we should discuss this through proper legal channels." "Marcus," Maya said, the name emerging like a prayer. "That was the last child I tried to save before my career ended. 8 years old, removed from an abusive home and placed with relatives who seemed perfect on paper." Her voice carried the weight of old grief, but also something harder. The system failed him because people with resources knew how to manipulate it. Because social workers like me were overwhelmed, underfunded, and convinced that fighting back would only make things worse for the children. Patricia's expression had gone carefully blank, but Maya could see calculation behind her eyes, reassessing the target that was supposed to collapse under pressure. "I spent 3 years believing I was powerless," Maya continued. "That people like you always win because you're willing to use weapons decent people won't touch. But you made a mistake coming here." "And what mistake was that?" Patricia asked, her voice tight with the first hint of genuine concern. Through the kitchen, Tom Hartwell's voice carried clearly. "Dorothy, the recorder's ready when you are." Maya smiled, feeling pieces click into place with the same satisfaction she'd once found in building bulletproof cases for endangered children. "You assumed I was alone, that Ezra died without family, that his inheritance was random charity instead of a 47-year-old family reunion." The environmental crew had abandoned their equipment entirely now, clearly recognizing they were witnessing something beyond their pay grade. The suits flanking Patricia exchanged glances that suggested this conversation had deviated from their script. "The people in my kitchen have been protecting this property since before I was born," Maya said. "They have documentation, witnesses, and 47 years' worth of motivation to see this through. But more than that, they've been watching people like you operate in this county for decades. They know your methods." Patricia's smile had vanished entirely. "Miss Chen, I think you're overestimating the support I have, the evidence we've gathered, or my willingness to fight this battle in every courthouse, newspaper, and town meeting until one of us breaks." Maya felt the clarity of absolute commitment settle over her like armor. "Because I have nothing left to lose except this farm, and people with nothing to lose don't negotiate." Patricia Brennan stepped backward, her confidence cracking like ice under pressure. For the first time since Maya had inherited the farm, the predator looked genuinely uncertain of her prey. The real battle was just beginning, but the terms had fundamentally changed. The silence stretched between them like a drawn bowstring, Patricia Brennan's calculated composure finally showing cracks. Maya watched the woman's eyes dart toward her companions, seeking reinforcement that wasn't coming. The environmental crew had begun quietly packing their equipment, their body language suggesting they'd rather be anywhere else. "You're making a serious mistake," Patricia said, but the threat lacked her earlier conviction. "This county operates on relationships built over generations. You're an outsider who inherited those relationships along with the land." Dorothy Hartwell interrupted, emerging from the kitchen with a manila folder thick with documents. Behind her, Tom carried what appeared to be an old cassette recorder, its presence oddly anachronistic in the digital confrontation. Maya felt a shift in the air, something that reminded her of the moment in custody hearings when the tide turned decisively. Patricia's companions were studying their phones with the intensity of people receiving urgent instructions from distant authorities. "Mrs. Hartwell," Patricia said carefully, "I'm sure whatever documentation you think you have, 47 years of correspondence between Ezra Whitmore and the Chen family," Dorothy said, settling the folder on the porch railing with deliberate weight, "including detailed accounts of previous attempts to force sales of heritage properties in this county. Names, dates, methods used." Her weathered fingers traced the folder's edge. Amazing what people confess in private letters when they think no one's keeping records. The older suit stepped forward, his face pale beneath expensive tailoring. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you're implying any impropriety in legitimate business transactions?" "I'm stating facts," Dorothy replied with steel-edged pleasantness. "Would you like to hear them?" Tom's father documented everything. Every midnight visit, every mysterious barn fire, every family that sold under pressure they couldn't explain. She gestured toward the recorder. "Some of those families are still alive, still angry, still willing to testify about methods that weren't quite illegal but weren't quite ethical either." Maya watched Patricia's face cycle through emotions: anger, calculation, something approaching panic. This wasn't the script the development company had planned for. Maya recognized the moment from her social work days when carefully constructed lies finally encountered irrefutable evidence. "Ezra knew you'd come eventually," Maya said, understanding flooding through her like dawn breaking. "He spent 47 years preparing for this, not just finding me, but documenting everything you'd done to other families, building a case." Patricia's phone buzzed insistently. She glanced at the screen, and whatever she read there drained the remaining color from her features. "We'll be in touch," she said abruptly, signaling her companions toward their vehicles. "I'm sure you will," Maya replied, but she was watching the environmental crew load their equipment with obvious relief. Professional intimidation worked best when the targets were isolated and afraid. Community solidarity changed the equation completely. As the vehicles departed, Maya felt something loosening in her chest. Not victory exactly, but the first real breath she'd taken in 3 years. The immediate threat had retreated, but, more importantly, she finally understood what Ezra had really left her. "They'll be back," Dorothy warned, settling into the porch chair with a sigh. "Different tactics, probably legal pressure next time, but they know now that you're not fighting alone." Sam rounded the corner of the house, his companions carrying equipment Maya couldn't identify. "Security cameras installed," he reported with satisfaction. "Motion sensors around the perimeter. Anyone sets foot on this property uninvited, you'll know about it." Maya stared at the efficient preparations, overwhelmed by the community mobilization she'd never expected. "How long have you all been planning this?" "Since the day Ezra told us he'd finally located his granddaughter," Tom said. "He knew inheriting the farm would paint a target on your back. We've been ready for 3 years." 3 years. While Maya had been running from every meaningful connection, convinced that isolation meant safety, an entire community had been preparing to protect an inheritance she hadn't even known existed. "Why?" she asked, the question emerging smaller than intended. Dorothy's smile held warmth that reminded Maya achingly of her grandmother. "Because love creates responsibilities that outlast the people who feel it. Because Ezra waited 47 years to give his family a home worth fighting for." She stood carefully, gathering the folder of documentation. Because sometimes doing the right thing means protecting people who don't even know they need protection yet. Maya looked across the fields where Ezra had worked alone for decades, tending land he'd hoped to share with family that might never come. The late afternoon sun painted the landscape golden, highlighting the careful stewardship that had preserved this place through generations of pressure to sell. For the first time since inheriting the farm, Maya could envision a future here, not as a temporary refuge from her failures, but as the foundation for something entirely new, something that honored both the love that had brought her here and the community that had kept it safe. The battle wasn't over, but she was no longer fighting it alone. 6 months later, Maya stood in the rebuilt barn, morning light streaming through windows positioned exactly where Ezra's original plans had indicated. The space smelled of fresh pine and possibility, no longer the refuge where she'd first encountered a dying stranger, but the heart of something she'd never imagined herself capable of creating. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the fields where Jennifer was leading a group of foster kids through the organic garden plots. Maya's cousin had surprised everyone by requesting a transfer to Vermont's Social Services Division, claiming she wanted to help develop the rural placement programs Maya had proposed. Watching 12-year-old Ashley carefully transplant seedlings with the same intense focus Maya remembered from her own childhood, she felt the familiar ache of protective love, but without the paralyzing fear that had once accompanied it. "The afternoon group arrives at 2, Dorothy Hartwell said, climbing the barn steps with a thermos of coffee and the easy familiarity of someone who'd become family. At 81, she'd appointed herself unofficial coordinator of the Whitmore Heritage Farms fostering programs, bringing 4 decades of rural parenting wisdom to children who'd known nothing but urban chaos. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. Watching Jennifer guide the kids toward the greenhouse Tom had helped her construct from Ezra's carefully preserved materials. The integration of agriculture and healing that social work textbooks had only theorized about was proving remarkably effective. Children who couldn't trust adults found solace in coaxing life from soil, learning that growth required patience and daily care rather than dramatic intervention. Patricia Brennan's development company filed for bankruptcy last week, Dorothy mentioned casually, settling into the chair she'd claimed months ago. Turns out our documentation helped several other families file lawsuits. Amazing how expensive settlements become when your business model depends on intimidation. Maya nodded, but the news felt distant now. The legal battles had ended months ago, but her transformation had continued long past the courtroom victories. She'd discovered that healing required more than winning. It demanded the daily choice to build something better than what had been destroyed. Through the barn's open doors, she could see the farmhouse where she'd initially planned to stay only long enough to settle Ezra's estate. Now it housed emergency placements, crisis interventions, and the kind of family dinners she'd dreamed of providing children throughout her career. The guest rooms Jennifer had helped her renovate stayed occupied by teenagers aging out of foster care, young adults who needed bridge housing while learning independent living skills, and occasionally social workers who'd burned out in urban systems and needed rural respite. "You've built something extraordinary here," Dorothy observed, following Maya's gaze toward the children now racing between garden rows with Ashley in determined pursuit. "Ezra knew you would. He saw the same thing in you that your grandmother did, the ability to create family where none existed before." Maya thought of the letters she'd finally been able to read completely. Ezra's careful documentation of her grandmother's stories about the granddaughter who fought for other people's children. He'd found her not through private investigators or social media searches, but through newspaper articles about a social worker who'd been disciplined for refusing to close cases she believed weren't resolved. Even in disgrace, her advocacy had marked her as the heir he'd been seeking. The afternoon group arrived precisely on schedule. 8 children between 6 and 16, accompanied by Sarah Martinez, a former colleague who joined Maya's program 6 months ago. Maya watched the kids spill from the van with a mixture of excitement and wariness that she recognized completely. The farm represented possibility, but they'd learned to be suspicious of adults who promised safety. "Who wants to meet the goats?" Jennifer called. and Maya smiled as defensive postures crumbled under the irresistible appeal of small animals requiring care. Within minutes, the same children who'd entered with folded arms and suspicious glances were debating goat names with passionate intensity. The community that had rallied to protect Maya's inheritance had embraced her transformation of it with enthusiasm that still amazed her. Tom Hartwell taught woodworking in the workshop he'd helped her establish in Ezra's old equipment shed. Sam's wife, Maria, led cooking classes using produce the children grew themselves. Even Pastor Williams, despite his initial reservations about Maya's unconventional approach to rural values, had become an advocate after watching traumatized children discover their capacity for nurturing. But the deepest satisfaction came from moments like this one, watching Ashley explain proper watering techniques to a younger child with the same protective intensity Maya had once brought to impossible cases. The girl who'd arrived angry and convinced that love meant disappointment was learning to trust her own ability to nurture growth. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from the state licensing board, farm certification renewed. Expansion approval granted for additional housing units. She looked across the land Ezra had preserved for 47 years, watching children who'd been labeled difficult placements discover their capacity for hope. The love that had brought her here had created something far beyond what any of them had imagined, not just a home, but a place where broken things could grow into something beautiful. For the first time since Marcus, Maya Chen was exactly where she belonged.